We get this question a ton. After living in 5 different countries and visiting over 90 countries, what's your favorite country to live in? Well, in today's video, we're gonna talk about the 2 places that we think are fantastic to live and places that we absolutely love. So today, let's discuss Portugal versus Singapore.
I'm Kalie.
And I'm Josh, and this is Expats Everywhere, and we have 11 criteria to go through to determine which one is the best. Let's go.
Let's start with cost of living.
Okay, this is pretty straightforward because we can look at data and see which country is more expensive to live in versus the other. But also something that we have to take into account is what wages are like. Now, in saying that, most of the time when an expat moves to a place like Portugal or Singapore, they're not necessarily put on a local wage. So we have to think about that being a thing, right? When we were living in Singapore, we were put on what was called an expat package, and therefore we had a wage and benefits that were higher than what an average Singaporean makes. Now, most of the time when an American, Canadian, or maybe even a Brit moves to Portugal, they're not usually moving with a job that's locally based. They're probably a remote worker or even a retiree, which doesn't actually happen in Singapore very much. Right. But therefore, the wages are higher than what a typical Portuguese wage would be.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, if you think of purchasing power, then you definitely would have to give it to Singapore because of the high wages. Portugal, unfortunately, has a lot lower wages, but cost of living, which we're talking about here on a day-to-day basis, it's so much lower in Portugal. When you think about, one thing that I will definitely talk about, of course, is the wine, because I love wine. I love talking about wine, and that's a good barometer for me. Yeah. Now, alcohol is taxed really high in Singapore, so just a bottle of wine is quite expensive. Even when you go through the airport and you get it at duty free, it's still like, even though the taxes,
it hurts.
Yeah, it's still like that's kind of the best place to get it, but it's still expensive compared to here. I mean, you can pop into a grocery store and find a great bottle of wine for 2, 3, 4 euros. I mean, sometimes the good ones are on sale, but they have so much wine that they have to put them on sale. Yeah. So I mean, something like a bottle of wine, whether it's at a grocery store or just getting a glass or a bottle at a restaurant, it's so much better in Portugal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite funny you mentioned that about the duty free. Going through duty free and picking up a bottle was a thing, whether you were a local or a foreigner. Like among our expat friends, it was definitely a thing. But even talking to our local friends, they're like, yeah, of course. Like you pick up a bottle of spirits or a nice bottle of wine at duty free because you're going to be saving a lot. And Singaporeans love to save money, and that's probably because prices are high there.
Yeah. I would say then that changes kind of the dynamic of what you do because you have a lot more like house parties, I guess. You go to people's homes because you have the more affordable wine or whatever drinks there as opposed to being able to go out here. But we'll get to that because I think that'll kind of factor into quality of life, which is another category later on. But for cost of living, housing is a huge one.
I was going to bring that up as well. Yeah. Housing is an absolutely massive one in Singapore, and although prices have risen here in Portugal, especially in places like Lisbon and Porto, it is not as expensive, anywhere near as expensive as it is for, like, let's say the same size of apartment in Singapore.
Well, in Singapore, I mean, it's an island, so they build up and they have a problem with space. So expect also to have a much smaller apartment or house. And
a lot more neighbors around.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, here you've got it really expensive in Singapore, really, really expensive. And while prices are going up in Portugal, it's still comparable. I don't know. I mean, I still think that both are high, but Portugal still makes more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So the winner of cost of living is Portugal. All right, next up is safety. Safety is also one that we can actually look at data and see which one is better. But first, let's talk about personal safety in being there since we've experienced both places.
Yes, so we've lived in both places. Well, we lived in Singapore for 4 years, and now we're over 4 years in Portugal. So we have a lot of experience with walking around at night, especially me as a female, and what that might look like. And I know that, especially being in Porto, which is a city, it's safe, it feels safe, but there's something that's a whole different level about walking around at night in Singapore. And I think some people might say, oh, it's draconian and they're always watching you and stuff, but honestly, if you're not doing anything wrong, then it's nice because they're always watching and they're always protecting, so you can feel safe. Whether that's a single female or that's allowing your kids to go walk around and do something or go to get a drink at Starbucks or something in Singapore, you can feel comfortable that it's very, very safe.
You know, one of the quirky things about Singapore is that they love their PSAs. And anytime a place like, let's say, is shoplifted, yes, that type of stuff does happen in Singapore, they will put out this sandwich board PSA saying like, on this date, this incident happened. And what's really kind of comical about it in a way is it's so infrequent that you see these things, it becomes a shock to people's system.
Yeah, like someone shoplifted
Like,
here
oh
3 months ago.
Yeah, they're like, can you believe it? Like it becomes the talk of the town. Whereas I'm sure that shoplifting and whatnot happens every day in every part of Porto, just Porto where we live.
Yeah.
But we just don't hear about it.
Portugal in general, or you've actually witnessed it before.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, so it is a big thing, like in Singapore, they make it a big deal. But that one's also kind of funny too, because it's like they're alerting the consumer that shoplifting, I don't know why they even alert the shopper that shoplifting happened.
I think it could be because Singapore has created a culture where it's a collectivist culture.
Yes.
I mean, okay, in Asia it's a collectivist culture anyways, but it's this collectivist culture like watch out for each other. And if you watch out for each other, you watch out for the collective, then everything's better for everybody.
Okay, so maybe they're alerting people like, be on the lookout.
Yeah,
if you see something, let us know.
I think that's why.
Okay.
But then other PSA things will be like on the metro or subway, like how to do stuff or to watch out maybe for molesters, like people that might touch other people in the metro.
Yeah,
Which
okay.
we never witnessed any of that, but I guess it does happen. It could happen.
Yeah.
But statistically, there is a clear winner on this.
Yes, I will say one other point I do want to say is there you don't see like homeless people or drunks or anything walking around either, because I know that sometimes
Causing problems.
Well, that can make people feel uncomfortable, like you're walking down the sidewalk and you see someone who makes you feel uncomfortable, so you want to cross over. You really don't get that in Singapore either.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of, while Portugal is known to be very safe, especially for Europe too, and it has high numbers there, what you actually feel might be a little different, and that's where we have the winner is
Singapore. One big factor when people travel or live in a place is health insurance and medical costs. We're going to take a closer look at Portugal versus Singapore when it comes to cost and coverage, but Kalie and I wanted to share with you what we did on our recent trip to Asia. Now, several friends of ours had recently spoken about Safety Wing, and we were excited when they reached out to partner with us on a video because we wanted to try out their service called Nomad Insurance. Nomad Insurance covers both travel medical expenses and certain travel disruptions, such as trip delays or lost luggage. Signing up was super easy and flexible. I really liked the interface on the website when we got signed up. Now, we didn't need this handy feature because we had already bought a plan in advance, but it is possible to sign up even after your journey has started. Their plans are flexible, and if you're doing extended travel, you can have automatic monthly payments. With the one plan we purchased, we were covered in all 3 countries we visited on this trip. In fact, Nomad Insurance covers you in 180 plus countries around the world outside of your home country. The price was really great for this 2-week trip too. So we'll be getting Nomad Insurance for future trips as well. If you'd like to check out Safety Wing's Nomad Insurance for yourself, whether it's to learn more or get a quote on an upcoming trip, check the link in the description section below.
Next on our list is food, and I'm sure this is going to be highly contentious because the food is very, very different. So what do you mean it shouldn't be? I mean, it kind of depends.
Because we have something to go by.
Well, okay, so we have
a tiebreaker. We have a tiebreaker, basically.
Okay.
No, I know what you mean.
I mean,
the food's so different.
very, very different.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say which one would be better because it kind of depends on what kind of food you like.
Yeah, it absolutely depends on what kind of food you like. But another thing that we have to take into consideration here, and we are taking into consideration, is options, availability of different types of cuisine, and then also price. Now, while many people think of Singapore as being a really expensive place, it might blow some people away to know that if you want to buy the local cuisine, if you want to have a Singaporean dish, or let's say like a Singaporean Malay or Indonesian dish, then you can and will pay less than what you would pay in Portugal for a Portuguese dish at like a regular cafe. Or yeah, exactly. You could actually pay even like half as much.
Yeah.
Like
so hawker
€3 versus €6 in Portugal. €3 in Singapore equivalent versus 6 in Portugal. Yeah. And 6 is like nowadays in 2024, 2025
Harder
on the
to find.
low end.
Yeah, harder to
like
find
that's
for sure.
that's like kind of the bottom
in the
of the
wall.
barrel.
Yeah.
Like to pay €6.
Right.
Now an average one would probably be closer to 10 in the cities.
Yeah, definitely.
But for €10 in Singapore, you could actually have a decent, like a pretty decent meal.
Yeah,
Not at a
that's true.
hawker center, but like
At a
food court or restaurant or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. So I think that does get lost, that while Singapore is known to be really expensive, there are good food options, like good quality food options. It's not like getting like a hot dog at a hot dog stand in like New York City where it's like, okay, it's not the best food, but it's cheap. Well, here you can actually get a full-on meal at a hawker center and it's really good food.
Yeah.
So you do have that as an option.
Yeah. On the other end of things, talking about local food, you've got the international food, and you have a wide variety of international options in Singapore, more so than I think your average place in Portugal, but also you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Like the cost of international cuisine, certainly like Western cuisine, in Singapore is higher, significantly higher.
Yeah, it's still just a tricky one. I mean, I think that Singaporean food does like to use a lot of like fish, but it's more like fish paste and the flavors of fish.
Yeah.
As opposed to Portugal, you obviously have the cod and the different types of seafood depending on where you are. But so a bit more fresh seafood.
Yeah. And I would say, honestly, if your palate leans, and this is probably going to be the theme of the video, if your palate leans more Asian and those types of flavors and culture and whatnot, then Singapore should win for you. But if you like things a little more standard European, then Portugal is likely going to win for you. So it's a toss-up because those two cuisines are so different. However, the tiebreaker would be a more, let's say, subjective yet objective list, which is Taste Atlas. And Taste Atlas for 2023-2024 came out with their rating, and their rating had Portugal at number 4 in the world and Singapore at number 56. And I don't even know how it'd be 56. Maybe there's not enough people who have tried Singaporean food to know what Singaporean food is like. That's right.
It's the people
voting.
It's
an aggregated kind of vote of what travelers think about different cuisines around the world.
Yeah.
But 56 is way too low. Singapore's food is awesome.
Well, they have a really good variety too. Because of the melting pot that it is, you get really good Chinese, you get really good Indian, Malay, Indonesian. So you have a lot of variety. It's Asian, but you have a lot of variety in the Asian field, and it's really good food. So yeah, 56 would be too low. And actually, I'm kind of surprised that Portuguese food is so high, if I'm being honest.
You're going to light the comment section up. I'm just going to duck.
You can blast me. It's fine.
She said it, not me.
They do have good options, but I do think it's a bit high being fourth in the world. But we're going to have that be the tiebreaker. It really depends, but the winner is Portugal.
Okay, the next category is cities. And in this category, we like to talk about the diversity, considering the diversity of options of places that you could live if you're deciding between the two countries on which one's better to move to. Now, many of you might know that Singapore essentially is a city-state in and of itself, so it's kind of one and the same.
Yeah.
But there are some diverse communities that you could live in and pockets, versus Portugal being like the size of a U.S. state, and therefore you have a lot more space, land for variety and differences. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, poor Singapore, they're a little island, so they're kind of already behind in that sense because there's only so much you can do, I think. But they do have different neighborhoods, So there is like Little India, which, is packed full of a different type of culture compared to Chinatown.
Yeah.
So you have those little boroughs, I guess you could say, and then, downtown in the Marina Bay Sands area, it's also a very different businessy feel. And then as you go to the outskirts of the island, you get a little more land, I guess you could say, but maybe a bit more nature.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for what they have, they do a good job. But how diverse is it really?
Well, in you saying that, it's literally like walking 3 to 10 blocks and then you're out of that neighborhood. So, I mean, these are neighborhoods. These are not cities. These are pockets that have kind of a different cultural feel and vibe. Whereas in Portugal...
use my word, vibe.
Whereas in Portugal, like you can literally go to different cities and there you have it.
Right, and then Portugal, obviously, you've got some big cities, medium-sized cities, and then small cities, and they all have a little bit of cultural history, I guess you could say, and it is different. So I guess the winner is pretty clear here.
Portugal. Next up, we want to talk about language. Now, this is a thing that many people are worried about, especially if you're not language learning inclined. So to put you at ease and let you know, in Singapore, there are 4 different languages. I don't know if that put people at ease. They're like, oh no, I have to learn.
I feel like all
now
4,
that I
no.
say that. But
No.
one of the languages is English. So if you're listening to this video and can understand the words coming out of my mouth, then you know English. And therefore,
Everything will be in
Singapore
English.
is pretty easy to adapt to because it's one of really the 2 main languages that's used there.
Yeah, while they do have 4 official, if they're going to have a sign with one language, it will be in English. The next one then will be Mandarin, but everything will be in English. Everyone speaks English, so you don't ever have to worry about, like, when you step up to someone, like, what do I say? You literally just start in English, whereas it's different in Portugal.
Well, but there could be a language barrier in the accent.
Yes.
There are many people who move, English speakers, who move to Singapore and they get caught up in the accent, number 1, and 2, in acronyms. Singaporeans love to use acronyms, so it could be confusing, or at least take some time to adapt to learn what those acronyms mean.
Yeah.
And you get used to using them as well because it's very common.
Right, and just terms they use might be different, something you've never heard or been exposed to
Could
before.
be more British terminology. Yeah.
Yep, so accent's a good one though in Singapore. So sometimes it's like we're speaking English, but I didn't understand what you said. But even still, when you come to Portugal, you generally, the best thing to do is start off in something Portuguese, even if it's just like a greeting.
Bom dia.
Yeah, or then in Portuguese asking if they speak English. You cannot automatically assume that they speak English. Maybe a little in Lisbon, like that's mainly the only place that you could, especially if you're in a more touristy area or at a hotel, for sure. But most places around Portugal, you cannot do that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So then the winner is?
If you're a native English speaker, the winner is Singapore.
Tax obligations. Fun.
This is always a fun one. We usually save it to the end in these types of videos, but we have a bigger topic that we need to unpack, so we decided to shuffle things up a little bit. This is one that honestly we can look at from a very analytical point of view, and I want to take a look at 2 different things. We have tax obligations, meaning like how much maybe personal income tax you'll have to pay, but then also what the goods and services tax are, and really on both sides of things, Singapore is better than Portugal. So goods and service tax in Singapore has actually risen substantially since we lived there. It went from 6% to 7%, and it's on the way up to either 11% or 13%, but that's still less than what you pay here in Portugal. Now, in Portugal and in Singapore for that matter, most of the time it's already included. So it's like, it's a VAT, it's a value added tax. So it's already sandwiched into the price.
Which I like so much better.
Yeah, versus like the US where you see the price,
and
but
then
then
they're gonna add
at the
tax
register.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything about taxes before?
Okay, I would say yes for taxes too. I think we should talk about the ease of actually filing.
Ooh, that's a great. No, this is an amazing point. I didn't even think about this. You're 100% right. Go on.
Singapore is on point. It's so easy to figure out how much you are going to pay in taxes. They've got an equation. You can do it online. You can check yourself, and boom, easy. Not so easy in Portugal. Portugal has gray areas, but it's like you could put yourself in this box, or one accountant might say, let's do it this way, and another accountant says it's this way. And while they can legally justify all these different ways, it's like, I'm confused. Which one should I be? Which one's best for my tax situation so I can minimize my tax burdens? Like, that's confusing.
Yeah, okay.
And stressful.
So real quick, we have had like tax performance done where at the end of it, it's like you should have a tax burden that's like this, but kind of anything could arrive in the mail. Like legitimately. And that anything can be like a couple hundred euro swing to like a couple thousand euro swing, which is humongous.
Yeah.
Humongous.
So
whereas in Singapore, literally there's a website for the year that you're filing taxes. You put in what your gross income is, and then it will spit out what you owe in taxes. There are very few tax breaks that most foreigners qualify for.
Yeah.
and then you see
That's it.
in
You know what you're
one
working
cell what you're supposed to pay. And in our 4 years there paying taxes, it was always that same number.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But here, I mean, there's so many people who, well, you just file and you're like, okay, what's going to come in the mail?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it comes and you're like, what? I should not owe this much. And so then you have to go back to your accountant or a different accountant and get it fixed.
Or
So
you're like,
that's
what? That's all? And then you're nervous because you're like, did something not get filed correctly?
Yeah. So I think that, Singapore does much better.
Yeah. So high-end tax rates and also the effective tax rate, Portugal is significantly higher than Singapore.
Well, you don't have to make that much to be in a pretty high tax bracket.
Yeah.
So the winner is
Singapore. All right, let's move on to a topic that is very important for many people as we advance in years, and that is
We do.
healthcare. Yeah,
Can't stop it.
I've started to need healthcare a little more.
Okay, healthcare. This is a tricky one, I think, because both have really good healthcare systems.
Yep.
In the sense that their doctors and nurses are good. In Singapore, they definitely speak English. In Portugal, they normally do, especially at that level. Maybe when you get to like the front desk of a place, the worker there might not speak much English, but when you get to a doctor, they do. So that's more important.
I want to say this. I think this is really important for me to let you know about this. While Portugal is highly rated with their healthcare system, the problem that you could have in Portugal is the quality of care that you get might be highly dependent on where in Portugal you are versus Singapore. In Singapore, you should always have close access to high care facilities. So there is that dynamic that's going on. There is a big caveat to this winner here, like the country that wins this category, and we're going to get to that in a second. But I do want you to know that if you're in a smaller town that doesn't have good facilities, that could be problematic. If you're in a place like Lisbon or Porto, then you're going to have access to high quality. But if you're not, then there could be some issues. And we've actually discussed this with someone on our podcast who had a bike accident, and they were kind of out in the wilderness.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They were trail riding, and there were a lot of like knock-on effects for a while because they were treated at a facility that didn't have good equipment.
Yeah, that's really tough. And of course, in Portugal, we talk a lot about the public versus private.
Yep.
Public is great, and that's where a lot of the tax money goes to and everything, but just getting into the public system for something that's non-emergency can take a really, really long time. And it can be very difficult and very frustrating trying to navigate that. So then a lot of us, we have private so that we can access the private hospitals, but of course you're paying for that, and there aren't as many facilities, and it's different if there's an emergency. So public and private, you've got both as an option, but you generally will be paying more to have private.
Yeah.
Because as we get to the caveat, money might come into it, right?
Yeah, so I think we can announce the winner and then say what the caveat is.
Okay.
All right.
So the winner here
So the winner is Singapore. And here's the caveat. The caveat is that Singapore is significantly more expensive when it comes to the cost of care. However, if you have a good insurance, you should be fine. It actually might be comparable to the private insurance that you hold in Portugal.
Yeah.
But with Portugal, you have that access to the public system. But if you're traveling to either country, for sure, the cost of being covered in Singapore will be more than the cost of being covered in Portugal.
So let's move on to the next topic, which is infrastructure.
All right, so with infrastructure, we're looking at all sorts of things. We're looking at public transportation, what building quality is like, what the roads are like, quality of water, these types of things. Yeah?
All right, well, we can start with water because that's a comparable one. You can drink from the tap in both countries.
Yep.
So water is really safe, so they both do a good job there.
Both do a good job. When it comes to roads, Singapore does have significantly less roads to manage.
But they're all modern.
I think a lot of what this category comes down to is money. And Singapore just has a lot more of it.
And they put their money into that. So their roads are really nice. I mean, they do have traffic issues because a lot of people drive.
Yep.
But they have nice roads. They're good. They're paved. If there is a pothole or something, they're fixing it right away.
Yeah.
As opposed to Portugal, even in the cities, there's like cobblestones and there's holes. And I mean, stuff can just go I don't know, a hole can be there for years.
Yeah.
And that's even in the cities. So imagine like when you get out to a smaller place,
Yeah.
dirt roads and everything. So
Public transportation is another thing. I think public transportation in Singapore is phenomenal. You will get public transportation in a lot of places in Portugal. However, some places, smaller places, won't have it. I mean, this is just a scale thing. But in the cities like Porto and Lisbon, I think the metros run quite well.
Yeah.
It's the buses that
oh, don't get Josh started on the
brutal.
buses.
I had an incident this morning. I won't talk about
The
it.
buses are quite inefficient here, and they don't
lie.
stick to their times.
They lie.
There are a lot of strikes going on because they're underpaid and understaffed, and so there's that whole dynamic as well. But while I would say the bus, like the actual quality of the bus is fine,
Yeah.
the
Quality of
timetable,
buses are great.
Although Singapore still is much better because since Singapore is hot, all the buses are air conditioned and everything. You might get on a hot bus in Portugal, especially if it's in like maybe getting warmer outside, but they're not going to turn the air conditioning on in the bus.
Yeah.
So it could get hot, especially if you're packed in.
Yeah.
But this is where Singapore does, like, it's comfortable in there. What you're also like not allowed to eat in the bus or the metro.
There's a lot of rules.
You can't have dogs or cats, even
Yeah.
if they're in a case. So I mean, like they're clean, but I guess
That comes at a
that.
cost. That definitely comes
Yeah.
at a cost. Whenever we had our dog, we would have to like call a specific kind of
Uber
Uber,
or Grab
Grab.
is the
Yeah.
the ride share. Yeah.
which here is Uber and Bolt.
Yeah.
Uber's actually gone out of Singapore. That happened while we were living there.
Mm.
Okay, so you have those types of infrastructural things, and then building quality. I think overall, like Singapore is living in the future.
They have beautiful buildings. They look beautiful. They're efficient. I mean, you'll have buildings that will have like greenery that's coming out of it. So like here you are in the middle of a city and there's this beautiful greenery that's
integrated,
Yeah,
yeah.
integrated in, and it just looks so nice, and it
Yeah.
gives this really just comfortable feel.
Yeah.
Whereas, in Portugal, they have a lot of older buildings that
Yeah.
need some love.
Yeah, Portugal's certainly more traditional when it comes to that, but I think with like looking at the whole thing, there's one winner,
Yeah, definitely.
and that winner is Singapore.
Well, earlier I mentioned that quality of life would be a topic, so here we are to it. Next is quality of life.
Yep, quality of life is one that we can look at indexes. However, we do have country indexes to look at, but it's probably fair to look at city indexes. And
Singapore is kind of like a city with
Yeah.
like its size and
yeah,
sense.
so it's like
Yeah.
depending on where you live. But also quality of life is an interesting one because it is more of a subjective one. Like how do you feel your quality of life is based on your wage and your purchasing power and the variety of things that you get to do. Because someone who's like locked in a city but they're an outdoor lover and don't have access to that
Yeah, they're
might
gonna-
feel
yeah.
like their quality of life is down.
Right, yeah. So you can go on Numbeo and you can check this out. You can even vote yourself on there to get these numbers. But let's break down then. Let's talk about Lisbon and Singapore, and then Porto and Singapore.
Yep.
To do the cities.
So let's say this, but between Porto, Lisbon versus Singapore, they all have high quality of life in terms of the quality of life index. Lisbon and Singapore are almost on par with Singapore being slightly higher.
Okay, so and that's taking into consideration just the everyday lifestyle, air pollution, safety, right? Anything else in there?
Well, there's cost of living as well.
Yeah.
Cost of living compared to what the average salaries are.
So you can do comparisons there. But then we looked up Porto on Numbeo just to see if there was any difference. And Porto actually has a higher quality of life compared to Lisbon and Singapore.
Its category is very high versus just high. But the fact that both of them are high, I think both countries are high, shows that there's certainly positive things happening in both Portugal and Singapore. It does just kind of come down to what does quality of life look like to you. So really you're the one that has to decide about what you want out of your life in that place, because certainly your economics will play a factor in that. Both places, both countries have a lot going on, so you have options to do things. Both of them have outdoor access. Most people think of Singapore as being like this city, but there's certainly outdoor opportunities that are no more than 10-15 minutes away.
Yeah, that are just kind of little pockets of greenery, parks that are hidden in the city that you can go into there and feel like you're not in a city anymore. So yes, they definitely have that. And I think for us, when we were talking about this, like personally, our quality of life, while we did have a really good quality of life in Singapore, wages were higher, cost of living was higher. So if we're talking about maybe going out and having like a meal or a drink, then it would be a little different than going out here with friends and grabbing like a couple drinks at a cafe and people watching and stuff. So quality of life, we had to just do different things. We were happy in both, but they were different.
Absolutely. And actually we made twice as much money in Singapore than we do now.
So they're very comparable, but if we're going to go personally what we think quality of life, the winner is Portugal.
All right, next moving on to our second to last category, which is climate and weather. I think that we can be pretty quick about this in saying that, again, it depends on what your preference is. We personally have a preference, and I also think that if we're looking at it analytically, actually I know when we look at it analytically how the ratings go, that Portugal is higher than Singapore, and it's mainly due to the fact that Singapore is like quite hot and humid. If you're an American and understand Fahrenheit, it is like in the mid to upper 80s all year round.
It's very close to the equator, so it's very like stable. I mean, I would say that is a good perk of Singapore. You know when the sun rises and when the sun sets, that doesn't change. And you don't have to check any weather apps. You don't have to look outside to see what people are wearing. You know what the weather's going to be like. It's always hot. It's probably going to rain at some point as well. So you kind of know that is nice. It's just stable. So if you like hot and humid, that's outside, and then everything is air conditioned inside. So maybe you take a little sweater with you because it's hot outside, but it might be cold inside. But so that is predictable. I do like that. But then obviously we talk about Portugal, and because of how it is, you have variety. You can get hot and humid in Algarve in the south, but then you can get cooler, and it snows here on the interior, so you have a lot of variety here.
Yeah, and I think that variety is something that helps me in terms of like knowing that time is passing.
Okay.
Like in a good way.
Yeah.
Maybe that's actually a bad thing. I don't know. That time, is passing.
But I get that, a bit more seasonal and stuff. You get change, so then things are changing. Yeah,
I did love the predictability with Singapore.
Yeah.
I love knowing that we basically had 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of darkness. The darkness. And then I also like the fact that like I knew exactly what to wear, albeit the rain, sometimes you wouldn't know if you should take your raincoat or umbrella. Basically always take your raincoat.
Always have it.
Always pack it.
Yeah, but at least you can use an umbrella. In Porto, it gets so windy that umbrellas break really easily. So yeah. But so the predictability of it is nice.
Yeah, so this is a winner with a caveat because it depends on what your preference is. But there is a winner here, and that winner is Portugal. All right, last up, we need to take a look at culture and society. This one's going to be contentious because it is one of those that does kind of come down to preference a bit.
Yeah, depends.
But there's also a richness that Portugal has. I mean, there's a much deeper kind of national culture versus Singapore because Singapore's so young.
Singapore is very young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a baby when it comes to countries.
Yeah.
But it's like a middle-aged man when it comes to actually how old it is. It's like 55 years old, I think.
Yeah, that's true. So it is difficult
actually,
because...
it's probably coming up closer to 60. We were there to celebrate SG 50.
We lived there at the time,
yeah, we lived there. That was our first year.
Okay, so when we're thinking about culture and society, it's difficult because, I mean, you have European culture and you have Asian culture.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Very different.
So what do you like? What do you not like about each? And then, of course, within these, there are different cultures because you can't just say like European because obviously Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Germany, they all have their own different cultures as well. Same with Asian, Japanese, Chinese, Thai. So while you have these two areas, you also have like the subcategories. And so in Singapore, you get, I think, a little more subcategory of the different cultures because of the melting pot. So you get a bit more of the Chinese, the Indian, the Malay, the Indonesian. You get that feel. Portugal, you're just getting a lot more Portugal on a day-to-day basis while you're here. Yeah,
I'm going to slightly disagree with that. In that, I think that you have more continents represented here in Portugal than you do in Singapore. And what I mean by that is, many of you might know that there are a lot of Brazilians that live here in Portugal. So boom, there's South America, right? Mm-hmm. But then you also have African influence because there are a lot of former Portuguese colonies in Africa and those people have moved to Portugal or generations have lived here in Portugal. So you have contact with Africans as well. So you have Africa, South America, North America with
Coming in.
Americans, Canadians,
Yeah.
more so, and then you have Europeans, of course.
Yeah.
Whereas in Asia, it's a variety of Asian countries,
And
a little
Australia.
bit of Australia. I was going
Yeah,
to say a little
yeah.
bit of Australia, and then
American.
some North America and Europe and European.
Yeah.
But
You're saying the mix is
the
greater
num-
in
the-
Portugal.
yeah,
Mix is greater in Portugal.
mix
I
of
think
continents
so.
is greater. So mix of continental
I
influences.
see what you're saying there. I would say that it's partially also because of Portuguese history and their stamp on the world. So even like
True.
when you go to Macau in Asia, you see Portugal
Yeah.
in there.
Oh, yeah.
So I think
Architecture, pastel nata, although it's way eggier.
Yeah. They've
The
adapted
pastel
a
nata
little
here
bit.
is
Much better. But anyway, so I think culturally, Portugal might get the edge because of that, they're seen a bit more around the world. They're maybe known a bit more around the world as well. And Singapore is just so young as a country. So culturally, I think you probably give it to Portugal.
Yeah, I think again it's a subjective one. It's one about what you want. But if we have to choose a winner, which we did have to choose a winner.
We do have to choose a winner. But also, just real quick, society-wise, I think it's a tie in the sense that the people in both places are very nice.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about just how the people are on a day-to-day basis now, that's a tie. That's a hard one because the people are nice.
Let me separate that real quick because I think this is important. You have on the Singaporean side, I think Singaporeans are a little more closed when it comes to like first contact, like a little more standoffish, a little more Eastern in that.
I see that.
And Portuguese are a little more open. Brazilians are very open, but Portuguese are a little more open. But when it comes to deeper relationships, we found Singaporeans, we were able to have deeper relationships faster after first contact than with Portuguese.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Like
to
we
put it, yeah.
got let into homes pretty quickly in Singapore versus Portugal.
Yep, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
So they're both kind, but in different ways and depending on the contact.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so this is a really tough one. And of course, you can disagree with us if you want, but we do have to pick a winner, and that winner is Portugal.
All right, so we have now tallied up the results. And much to my surprise, because I thought the winner was going to be clear here, but much to my surprise, we do have a winner that goes in a different direction. The winner is 6-5, Portugal. Now, does that mean that we want to stay in Portugal forever and would never move back to Singapore? Absolutely no. We've actually thought about Singapore as being a place that one day we could return to, but who knows when that day will be. Super happy here in Portugal. We're not just picking Portugal because we're homers and it's the home team. But it's because we really love it here and we believe in Portugal, and Portugal does stack up to these other great countries around the world.
Yeah, and we're going to actually unpack Portugal versus Singapore a little more on our podcast. So if you want to hear more and why we chose certain things, then you can check out our podcast. And then also if you want to see more about Portugal, then check out this playlist right here. Now, let's get moving.
Bye.